Watch this.
Thousands came to stop the steal. Instead, they turned it into a deadly attack on our nation's capital. Hundreds have been arrested for their part in the insurrection. A year later, we look back at Idaho's role at the attempted coup. Don't like the rules? Then change them. Don't like the outcome? Apparently you can change that too. Some members of Idaho's Republican Party are asking to do both when it comes to this May's primary. Less than a month after state health officials deactivated crisis standards of care, COVID cases continue to climb. But a backlog in testing may be deflating the actual numbers. An insurrectionist mob, as hundreds of Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol 1 year ago today, in an attempt to stop the certification of the presidential election. At least 6 Idahoans were involved in the deadly siege.
Didn't hurt anybody. I didn't take anything. I didn't break anything. My intention was just to go there to have my voice heard.
Meridian's Josiah Colt caught on camera climbing into the Senate chamber, sitting in the vice president's chair.
I do not condone any of the violence that happened. I'm there, and it's tragic, and it breaks my heart about what that turned into.
Boise's Yvonne St. Cyr.
Welcome to the communist country of America.
Live streaming herself inside the Capitol.
I don't regret going to D.C. I went for the experience. I went because I felt like we have a country that we need to fight for and stand up for. If I am guilty of poor judgment and I'm guilty, then I'll own that. I own what I do. We tried. We tried. We tried.
Also inside, Idaho's congressional delegation. That's Representative Russ Fulcher being escorted to safety, gas mask in hand. He later tweeted, "I will always respect our citizens' First Amendment rights and the rule of law. The violence seen today is unacceptable. It does not move us closer to solutions." His congressional colleague, Representative Mike Simpson, offered this: "We have a constitutional right to peaceful protests, but the clashes with police and destruction of property must stop now. We can disagree in a better way." Senator Jim Risch concurred concisely. "This nonsense and violence needs to stop now." Later adding, "Today's events, meant to disrupt a process at the heart of our democracy, were unpatriotic and un-American in the extreme." Senator Crapo also acknowledged the right to protest peacefully, but said, "What we witnessed at the U.S. Capitol today was not peaceful. Such violence is wholly unacceptable. All perpetrators should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law," he wrote. "Actions like today thwart the rule of law and could leave lasting, devastating consequences on our nation." It's been a year, 1 year to the day. Senator Crapo saying all perpetrators should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Well, federal prosecutors have so far charged more than 700 people related to the attack. As for the 6 Idahoans, Meridian's Josiah Colt, he turned himself in on January 12th. He pleaded guilty July 14th to obstructing an official proceeding and will be in court next on January 19th. 53-year-old Yvonne St. Cyr from Boise was arrested March 3rd. She is charged with knowingly entering or remaining in a restricted building or grounds without lawful authority and violent entry and disorderly conduct on Capitol grounds. St. Cyr supposed to be in front of a judge for a status hearing on January 17th. Nampa's Duke Edward Wilson was arrested April 15th. After first pleading not guilty, he pleaded guilty in September of assaulting a federal officer and obstructing an official proceeding. The 66-year-old is set to be sentenced March 4th. Pam Hemphill of Boise was arrested and charged on August 4th. She faces 4 misdemeanors, including violent or disorderly conduct. Sandpoint's Michael Pope was arrested in February and charged with 2 felonies and 5 misdemeanors. The 32-year-old's next court appearance is in 5 days. And 39-year-old Tyler Tu from Idaho Falls. He was the last to be arrested on November 30th. He is charged with 4 federal crimes, including entering and remaining in a restricted building and disorderly and disruptive conduct while in said building or grounds. This is what has happened in the year since the riot at the storming of the U.S. Capitol. A year, but still fresh in a lot of people's minds. This morning, Deborah Hennessy texted us. She asked us to reach out to Senators Risch and Crapo. She says they need to speak out against against this if they want Idahoans to know what they uphold, that they do uphold the Constitution and the sanctity of the U.S. Capitol. They also need to speak out against the violence against the U.S. Capitol, she said. We need to hear their voices. We would also love to hear their voices, Deborah. But however, after reaching out to them earlier this week to hear their thoughts and perspective 1 year later, we unfortunately won't be hearing their voices. We only heard back from 3 of them, in fact. Senators Risch and Crapo, they offered up the statements they made a year ago. Nothing new. Congressman Simpson didn't respond to our request this week, but did say this back in March as the lone Idaho delegate to vote in favor of bipartisan committee that would investigate the January 6th insurrection.
I understand their concern, but the reality was January 6th was a disaster. And we need to find out what went on there and why. And these people that broke into the Capitol, literally broke into the Capitol, these were not just protesters. A lot of them were there to cause damage. And they need to be charged. They need to suffer the consequences of their actions.
Meanwhile, in explaining his no vote on forming the bipartisan joint January 6th commission back in May, Risch said he didn't want it to become about partisan politics, I guess any more than it already was. But a special January 6th investigative committee was formed anyway back in June, consisting of just House members. However, both Representative Simpson and Representative Fulcher voted against that one. Mr. Fulcher, by the way, did respond to our request of a retrospective today, a look back 1 year later. He reiterated how the events of January 6th were wrong and those responsible should be held responsible. And constituent confidence in our republic has been reduced as a result. When asked about the 2020 election, the same 2020 election which he objected to certifying twice, even celebrating those objections with a dramatic black and white photo of him signing them, formal objections filed, just before the rioters rolled into the Capitol building. In fact, he was about to object to Arizona's electoral vote when the chaos began. We came back later and did object to Arizona and Pennsylvania. When asked about the election, Mr. Fulcher stood behind his claim there was widespread voter fraud in several states, saying the debate prioritizing election integrity is healthy. Numerous states violated their own election laws, he says, prompting state legislatures across the country to focus on improving their election systems. We went over this claim of Representative Fulcher's back in January 5th of last year, right before he was about to make that objection. There hasn't been any evidence of states violating their own election laws. In fact, a lot of courts have backed up the changes they did make prior to the 2020 election. And in those swing states where there were alleged concerns of voter fraud, the Associated Press found only about 470 potential cases of such. 470 potential cases out of millions of votes. And if by saying improving election systems, Mr. Fulcher means some states have made them more restrictive, well, in some cases to the detriment of our democracy, then I guess so. They have done that. So that's what's happened in the year since the attack on our nation's capital. And that healthy debate about elections continues a year later, even here in Idaho. We have our own set of rules on how they should be run, set up by the legislature. For example, back in 2011, lawmakers made it so anyone who wanted to vote in a primary election had to be a registered member of that political party, a closed primary system. However, Idaho's law does allow political parties the option to leave theirs open, which is what the Democrats did. State Republicans, however, closed their primaries the following year, allowing only registered Republicans to vote in the Republican primary. Some call it restrictive. Some others say it's not restrictive enough. Andrew Bartline was able to get his hands on a proposed rule change that state Republicans are trying to make within the Republican primary. And if passed, it would change who's eligible to vote in that primary in Idaho. Andrew?
Yeah, this proposed rule gives the Idaho Republican State Central Committee the power to decide who represents the Republican Party on the November general election ballot. It would not be a vote from the registered voters here in Idaho, Republican voters. So it takes away the power from the people and gives it to the committee. 210 people make up that committee, with representatives from each county and legislative district. The rule says, quote, any candidate seeking the Republican nomination for governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, secretary of state, state treasurer, superintendent of public instruction, or controller shall first obtain an endorsement from such office from the State Central Committee of the Idaho Republican Party. And this also extends to Idaho's U.S. senators and representatives, state legislatures, a sheriff, clerk, essentially most elected positions. The rule says rounds of voting continues until one candidate receives 60% of the State Central Committee's vote. We spoke with Taro Tovey, a member of the Rules Committee. He's openly against the rule change. He says this rule is not built on the values of the Republican Party.
The problem is I'm surprised that these candidates that are highly supported by the Idaho Freedom Foundation and these factions, especially out of Bonneville County, Brian Smith is running for Congress. I'm surprised he hasn't denounced this, or Janice McGeechan. I'm really, it tells when a political person is so afraid of their opponents that they don't want the people to decide. They want a small group of people to remove their opposition so they may have a clear path for the Republican primary, which in our state usually is the only one that matters because the general election is usually not contested in most races.
We also reached out to State Committeeman Doyle Beck. He's one of the Rules Committee members submitting this proposed rule change. Beck confirms the documents we have are legitimate and correct, and he wouldn't speak to us on camera, but did tell us over email, quote, "The primary election is to find the best Republican candidate possible, to challenge the other best party candidate possible. The 210 people you referred to, that would be the committee, are all elected precinct committeemen or leaders elected by the precinct committeemen. This is a very grassroots that can be more easily replaced by the populace if they don't like their decisions." And here's Tovey's response.
They were voted in to represent their constituency, not to hold a vote of these elected offices. So effectively what they want to do is remove the primary altogether. They don't want to have a primary.
The resolution also says the Republican Party has the right to choose its preferred nominee, adding this rule is a response to the press encouraging Democrats, independents to register as Republicans and sabotage the integrity of their primary election. It's important to note Ada County Clerk Phil McGrain told Joe Paris in November on the county level, it's very rare for them to see somebody change their registered party, if at all.
I know. So, Andrew, I'm looking at this proclamation right now that they want to bring to the winter meeting. Whereas multiple media outlets in Idaho have recently published articles actively encouraging Democrats and independents to fraudulently register as Republicans in order to sabotage Republican voters' rights to choose their own nominees. First of all, I'll contest that myself because this isn't something we've been promoting. We have just been simply saying this is something that is possible under Idaho law, therefore not fraudulent. So I'll take issue with that and calling it dishonest and unethical behavior by media outlets. But besides that, let's say what this is. This is what they're trying to avoid this. They're trying to avoid people switching parties just to kind of go in and mess up the Republican primary, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's their whole point. That's the logic behind it in the resolution. And we did a story on this a while ago with Joe Paris. That's where we got that information from Phil McGrain as well, that they really don't see any evidence of that happening. I'm sure it's possible, I'm sure somebody's done it, but that it's widespread and happens often. They didn't see that at the county level at all here in Ada County.
And it's worth pointing out, this is not something that is a done deal just yet. There's a process to this, right?
Yeah, the Resolutions and Rules Committee both have to approve the rule, and then the General State Central Committee then has the vote. That would be 210 of them. So basically, it's 210 people that would vote on whether they, the same 210 people, should have the power to decide the Republican nominee for the entire state. Brian?
Right. So instead of letting the voters decide, they don't like the outcome, we think this guy's better. In some cases, I could see how that might play out, but boy, it's kind of sketchy. All right. Thank you very much, Andrew. COVID cases hitting record highs in the United States. We're not quite there yet here in Idaho, but there may be a reason why. There's no wait to get into the 208 conversation. Our text line is open, always. So feel free to send us a message. We'll take your comments, your questions, and yes, your complaints. We actually appreciate those. 208-321-5614. Don't forget to include your name and the hashtag, the208. And as always, if it's a good one, we'll share it with the rest of the class at the end of the show.
larger numbers than public health has had to deal with anything before or even previously with COVID.
That's a big deal. Yeah, they're talking about COVID testing. And because the Omicron variant spread so quickly, testing numbers are even worse than when Idaho's hospital systems were in crisis standards of care for the majority of the fall. Public health districts, including Central District Health, who you just heard from, which serves Ada, Boise, Elmore, and Valley counties, they say they're seeing record numbers. In December, processing around 700 to 800 tests a week. This week, the first full week of January, that number increased to more than 4,000 tests. We still got a few days left, by the way. That's already a 433% increase. So how does this number, these increasing numbers, impact your wait time for results? Here's Katya Stepovic.
During crisis standards of care in Idaho back in September, Central District Health was seeing close to 1,000 tests coming in to be processed every week. Believe it or not, today that number has quadrupled.
Our health district had 700-800 cases a week a few weeks ago. Now, for the first week of January, we're thinking we'll be close to 4, which will be our highest ever in the COVID pandemic so far.
For what?
4,000 cases.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
CDH, which oversees Boise, Ada, Elmore, and Valley counties, is being flooded with recent demand for COVID results.
Right now, we have about 200 labs to review still from 2021 to determine if they're cases or not, and about 5,000 so far from 2022.
Lindsay Haskell, program manager of the Communicable Disease Program, says about 90% of the tests that come in are positive. And with all the tests that have yet to be processed, get comfortable while you're waiting.
When we start seeing so many people seeking testing and so many labs having to be run in our area, but across the nation, that the labs also have a backlog, and instead of having a test result within a day or two, it can be 3 to 5 days. And now when we're looking at that period of time for people needing to isolate or quarantine, we're out of that by the time they're receiving test results.
Are most of these test results within a certain age range of people, or what are you seeing most commonly?
We are seeing it impact everyone across the board. So all age groups, all areas within our jurisdiction are being impacted.
Because of the backlog, CDH has prioritized certain phone calls, meaning less people will get called and more will be navigated to find results and information online.
It's been tough to keep up, so we're making adjustments to our process to do the best we can to stay on top of it. It's seeming a little bit insurmountable right now.
She adds that based on clinical samples and wastewater testing, majority of the test results are Omicron positive. So if you have a simple inkling that you may be positive, isolate while you wait for your results.
We're all tired, even in public health. We're tired of hearing it. We're tired of dealing with it, but it's not tired of us yet.
Okay, so that is from Central District Health, Katya, that you spoke with today. What about the other public health districts around the state?
Well, you would think that they're saying really the same thing, but according to Southwest District Health, they have no backlog, so results are taking anywhere from 1 to 2 days. But they did say in the last week alone, testing has increased by 50%, so double. South Central Public Health is experiencing also longer wait times, and they say they're assisting everywhere that they can, but that it's really difficult to get extra test materials to fill that need.
One of the biggest issues right now, too, are those testings, those at-home kits, those free testing kits. Those are few and far between to come by out there. All right, thank you very much, Katya. Before we headed off for our holiday break, we told you about the tiny town of Atlanta, Idaho, and their unfortunate mail problem. Just a few weeks before the holidays, the full-time crowd of about 50 people up there, they stopped getting their mail. It's happened before, in part because of their remote location, about 130 miles away from Boise, and you have to get there over Forest Service roads deep in the Boise National Forest. And this time of year, sometimes you usually have to go through some deep snow. Not sometimes, usually. But last month, their 70-year-old mailman, John, who had been delivering the mail there for the better part of 10 years, he slipped and he fell on a patch of ice and unfortunately broke his hip. They were able to find a replacement to deliver the mail, but that didn't last long. And then trying to find a permanent replacement, well, that's been kind of tough. So with Christmas coming up and packages en route to Atlanta and no mailman to deliver them, Atlanta residents were without any mail service. At the end of yesterday's show, we shared this text message we got from Kitty in Eagle. Did the people in Atlanta ever get their mail? Yes, we answered yesterday. We realized, though, we never really gave an update because we've been off for so long. But here it is. A delivery was made on Christmas Eve to Atlanta, just in time to get those packages in, 2 days after we shared their story. However, that didn't mean their problem was solved. Jim Fraser today told us, he's a full-time resident, by the way, of Atlanta, and one of those trying to figure out a solution. He told us they've had a few deliveries since then, but nothing permanent has been settled. He says they keep filling out the complaint forms every other day or so, and that seems to be getting the mail up there every once in a while. However, there won't be any delivery today to Atlanta, we're told. Too much snow. All right, a lot of comments sent in about the GOP primary coming up and the winter meeting to kind of change the rules of the primary in May. But first, I want to get to what Ann said. How about holding the BLM rioters and looters responsible as well? Why just the Capitol rioters? There were innocent lives taken and livelihoods ruined by the BLM riots. A police station and a whole Seattle block was taken over. Is this any less of a crime? No, says Ann. But let me point out something to you, Ann. Seattle, right? The 208, we're talking about Idaho stuff here. There was none of that here. So we're not holding anybody accountable when that doesn't happen here. We had Idaho people in D.C., though, doing that stuff. So we'll hold them accountable. There are 3 times the number of registered Republicans than Democrats in the state. What are the Republicans so afraid of? The voters cannot be trusted to vote in their exclusive primary is the question. That's a very good question. I would never fraudulently register as a Republican. If the Republican Party wants to elect a clown, I guess I'll get to watch a circus, says Mark. Kind of a worry that some people have as well. So let me get this straight. Republican Party doesn't even want its own membership at large to vote the candidate, decide the candidate. Their little committee will decide, taking away people's input through votes. Sounds like Russia, says Sue in Boise. Susan, though, says she did change her affiliation in time for the primary and plans to change back. So it's legal and it's happening. We'll see you tomorrow.